Well, I am truly honored to be a part of this forum. I have thoroughly enjoyed listening to the presenters. Being from Canada, of course, I've never been to Taiwan, but I have come to learn quite a bit of what you are encountering, what you are enduring with the threat of China and this dis and misinformation. As Nancy said, I am a former Canadian Armed Forces chaplain and been in 2 war zones with the military. And presently, I am researching and writing military doctrine for the Royal Canadian Chaplain Service. As such, I am required to frame my writing in the larger military context, which means an appreciation of the circumstances of war. So let me share this slide, which looks rather confusing. I'll unpack this for you quickly. Because what you talked about in your concept paper, cognitive warfare, very much factors into what we are facing in warfare today in its various forms. Now, you'll notice here there are 2 axes here in this diagram. The horizontal one moves from the covert activities to the overt activities. And then the other axis, the vertical, goes from persuasive activities to the coercive. And warfare has changed dramatically in recent decades. And instead of simply categorizing activity in terms of the level of violence associated with it, this matrix describes activities according to the method, or the coercive to the persuasive, and the nature of those that are employing it. Now, you'll notice with these arrows, there is a progression here. These blocks, the gray, the green, and the red, and that is the progression of war from the gray zone to irregular limited warfare to all-out warfare. And the gray zone conflict is relatively a new term and more accurately captures the kinds of threats that transpire globally in the contemporary context. It is in the gray zone that adversaries try to achieve warlike objectives without becoming engaged in armed conflict or direct confrontation. And we call those, and you'll find this in all military doctrine, sub-threshold activities. And notice the red dots that are outside of the 3 blocks, 3 colored blocks. These constitute sub-threshold activities. Such things like what we're facing in Canada right now is the Chinese interference in our elections. And that these are alleged at this point as we are investigating this. One of your speakers mentioned earlier on the joint military exercises that have transpired by the Chinese around Taiwan. Even your President Tsai visited Speaker of the House, the President Kevin McCarthy. China launched a 3-day Army, Navy, and Air Force exercise around Taiwan. These are below the threshold of conflict, but nonetheless coercive and threatening. Economic sanctions are others. Freedom of navigation. When the United States Navy sails a ship through the Strait of Taiwan, that is a sub-threshold activity. Okay, it's sending a message, but it doesn't elicit outward conflict. One of your speakers also mentioned Nancy Pelosi, the former Speaker of the House. I was intrigued by what one of our media outlets said about her time here. It says, China apparently took the trip as a provocation and rattled its saber. Cyber attacks on Taiwanese government units set a new daily record, which was 23 times greater than the previous one. At the same time, and this is quite something, 7-Eleven stores on the island were hacked to display the message, Nancy Pelosi get out of Taiwan. These are sub-threshold activities. This is cognitive warfare. Now, this is someone that you probably should become acquainted with, Renee DiResta, who is at Stanford University in California. But she heads up the Stanford Internet Observatory. She likens this, what we're talking about, in this phrase. She says, this is a kind of warm war, not the active declared open conflict of a hot war, but beyond the shadow boxing of a cold one. We all know Barack Obama. He was there a year ago, April. And this is what he said about the misuse of social media. It is not necessary for people to believe this information in order to weaken democratic institutions. You just have to flood a country's public square with enough raw sewage, raise enough questions, spread enough dirt, plant enough conspiracy theorizing that citizens no longer know what to believe. This is the fight that we are in. This is it. Let me move to Bulgaria. The Open Society Institute was founded by billionaire and philanthropist George Soros. For the last 5 years, they have conducted studies on media literacy. It's called the Media Literacy Index, and you have my PowerPoint, so you'll see the website there. You can look for it yourself. It's a 55-page document. I'm not going to share everything that's in that document, obviously, but the index has predictors which determine a country's media literacy, but ranks societies with respect to their potential for resilience in the face of what they call post-truth phenomenon. And these are the indicators: the media, education, trust, both societal and interpersonal, and e-participation. I'm only going to touch on 2 of these, education and trust. But interestingly enough, of the 41 countries in the study, for the last 5 years, Finland has ranked first for the last 5 years. Officials say Finland's success is not just the result of its strong education system, which is one of the best in the world, but also because of a concerted effort to teach students about fake news. Media literacy is part of the national core curriculum, starting with the youngest to the eldest students. They take it very seriously. For some reason, I cannot advance my slides. It has jammed. Can you advance there on your end? Because it will not respond.
Rachel?
Isn't that too bad? No,
Rachel, can you share from your end?
Well, we're doing this from the other side of the world, so, it's always a bit risky. Okay. So there's Rachel. Oh, good for you, Rachel. There. Okay, okay, one more. Go to the next slide. There you go. Okay, great. Thank you, Rachel. As we say in Canada, you saved my bacon. Okay, great. Okay, now, Finland takes this fight seriously, starting even with the primary. These are very young children. They start by using fairy tales and fables, and take the wily fox here, who always cheats the other animals with his sly words. So these are metaphors for a certain type of person or a form of communication. Next slide, please. Very good. Secondary schools. Multi-platform information literacy and strong critical thinking have become core cross-subject components of a national curriculum that was introduced in 2016. Okay, the animation, that you just hit the next one. There, okay, that's good. In math lessons, pupils learn how easy it is to lie with statistics. In art, they see how an image's meaning can be manipulated, and we're just waiting to see what artificial intelligence is going to thrust upon us. In history, they analyze notable propaganda campaigns, while Finnish language teachers work with them on the many ways in which words can be used to confuse, mislead, and deceive. Isn't that incredible? Go to the next slide, please. Now, this is a class in Helsinki of secondary students, high school students. The exercises include examining claims found in YouTube videos and social media posts, comparing media bias in an array of different clickbait articles, probing how misinformation preys on readers' emotions, and even getting students to try their hand at writing fake news stories themselves. They take this very seriously, and they're having quite a bit of success. One of their lead educators says, what we want the students to do is that before they hit like or share in the social media, that they think twice, and they ask themselves questions like, who has written this? Where has this been published somewhere else? Can I find this information from a different source? So the Finns have successfully combined fact-checking and critical thinking and voter literacy. Now, other countries are seeking Finland's blueprint. A slew of European Union nations are going to Finland, but one of your neighbors too, Singapore, they've gone to learn how they may be able to capture this themselves. Now, I'm going to transition here. Don't hit a slide yet, Rachel. But I want to talk about the potential response of the church or religion writ large. Now, please receive what I'm about to share in the spirit in which it is given. I don't come before you today with answers to what has become perplexing for the church, for our respective nations, and for democracy itself. I mean, that would be terribly presumptuous on my part. I'm simply offering ideas that come from my experience of war and years of study of the role of religion in conflict. And it may be worthy of consideration, because what I have discovered is that what can be applied to a conflict situation can be generalized to other contexts. So that's what I'm doing here today. Okay, next slide. Okay. So this has a number of animations, and I'll just walk you through it, Rachel. Thank you very much. So I'm going to be going back to one of the indicators coming out of Sofia, Bulgaria, and that is that of trust. Now, religion's strategic spaces. I call this religious leader engagement. Sociologists increasingly recognize that religion can occupy strategic social spaces within civilian society, which potentially lend themselves to creating incentive for change. Precedent exists that when certain causal factors present, the religious realm has been the impetus for significant change where other initiatives have failed. Okay, first animation. Rachel, there you go. Individuals. Now, religious leaders are often known as middle-range actors. They have a tremendous amount of social capital. Now, I realize that in certain parts of the world, religion has had a meltdown, especially in North America, but in other parts of the world, it's been associated with some rather negative things. We've heard that about Russia and the Russian Orthodox Church and Putin, where religion has been co-opted. But still, there remains a high degree of trust for religious leaders within the general population. And the social capital they enjoy brings with it a certain moral authority which contributes to a receptive atmosphere among the populace to their ideas and proposals. Now, you'll see here under individuals, meaning religious leaders, I have here middle-range actors. Religious leaders are known and appreciated at the grassroots among the people. Okay, that's where they live. But concurrently, they have access and influence at some of the highest levels of civil leadership. So that is, so you see middle-range actors, they are at the grassroots amongst the people, but yet are able to speak to political leaders. In pursuing necessary change, individual religious leaders have been able to transcend differences that may exist across boundaries in pursuit of coming together with those of kindred spirit, those of like mind, with a view to creating a new narrative, to bringing about needed social change. And they are called, as you see there, boundary spanners. Now, boundary spanners bridge that which normally divides and join hands with others of like mind in an effort to bring about change. I believe God's Spirit moves in such ways. And I would like to suggest today that there are those of other faith traditions in Taiwan who deeply share your concerns, who are appalled by the constant assault of dis and misinformation on Taiwanese society emanating from China. I would also suggest if there was something that they could do to combat this cognitive warfare, they would gladly do it. Next animation, please. The intellectual space, the intellectual capital. Religious organizations within civil society often constitute intellectual spaces, where societal injustice may be opposed. The intellectual capital represented in the cross-pollination of ideas among religious leaders of the various faith traditions cannot and must not be underestimated. Coming together in open and honest dialogue may give rise to new and creative ideas and narratives as to how such subversive interference may be addressed. This shared intellectual space serves as an incubator of sorts. And I believe that God dwells in the midst of the collaborative efforts of God's children who join together to confront the forces of evil in whatever form it takes. In this instance, where outside forces continually drive wedges of confusion and doubt via mis and disinformation among your citizenry, dialogue across religious boundaries may prove beneficial in the collective. Animation, please. They're the institutional capital. It is in the institutional space of religious organizations where the intellectual challenges of change are enacted, often extending beyond the local or regional and sometimes even international. The institutional capital. Faith traditions have a built-in way to communicate with the grassroots, large segments of the population. Religious institutions possess significant infrastructure via churches, temples, shrines, mosques, synagogues, houses of worship, virtual community hubs. It is also true that religious groups are often the most effective when they are part of a broader or a general coalition dedicated to future change. Any new narrative or approach emanating from a coalition of religious leaders from the various faith traditions may attract other civilian society organizations in support of that cause, and thus begin to fortify your society against the onslaught of misinformation and its harmful effects on democracy. Next animation, please. Okay, just hold it there. And this is almost done here. Superordinate goals. Okay, hit it again, Rachel. There you go. This is what it means. A superordinate goal, achieving together what one cannot accomplish alone. Collaborative activities. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. The synergy of collaborating together can bring about significant change. So as representatives of the Christian church in Taiwan, gathered in this forum, as you consider how best to respond to the destructive forces of dis and misinformation confronting Taiwanese society, I offer this as food for thought. Food for thought that would be for select leaders of the Christian Church of Taiwan to reach across religious boundaries to those religious leaders you have reason to believe would be open to dialogue, kindred spirits, usually moderately thinking individuals, and to come together to dialogue on your shared concerns on the devastating societal effects of manufactured misinformation, and together determine and develop a strategy, and to consider, this is just an idea, to consider together borrowing a page from the Finnish playbook in creating together a strategy to support your government in curriculum development at all educational levels as a means of combating the ills of social media, to teach your youth to differentiate fact from fiction, to discern fake news from truth, and to use social media responsibly. Now, I know that you have a Ministry of Digital Affairs. That is quite an accomplishment from my perspective. The only other organization politically that I know of would be the European Union, and they have brought out a law called the Digital Services Act, and they are tangibly confronting much of what you are here about today. But your Ministry of Digital Affairs, what that would suggest to me is that if indeed a proposal came from the religious leaders of Taiwan about curriculum development, that the government would be predisposed to consider such a proposal by virtue of the headspace that they are already in. So Rachel, give us the last slide. You all know this lady. Apparently she was here with you just a couple of months ago. Without facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. Without these, we have no shared space. Democracy is a dream. Thank you very much.